is the agenda. And if you are listening in on YouTube, just drop me a line in the chat if you can hear us. Okay, Happy New Year. 2020 was an interesting year for many accounts, but for Eth2 and Ethereum, I think it was a great success. Thank you all around. And we have a lot of work to do and a lot of exciting things to accomplish this year. So here we are. I flipped it a little bit today. I think we'll start with client updates. Then we'll talk about a proposed mid-year upgrade and some of the things there. I think there are a couple of proposals floating around. We need to get this kind of written up in a more concrete way so we can engage with it better. But there are some PRs in the repo that I'd like some input on. We can get to that a little bit later. Then I want to just kind of give you the broad on Q1 R&D, which will kind of I think client teams can dip their toes in, do some education here and some input, which will help set the stage for upgrades kind of expected in the latter part of the year and early next year. And then we can talk about just some general stuff and see where we're at. So let's go ahead and get started. We can start with client updates, and Teku, give us started.
Sure. Hey guys. So we merged in a new community contributed feature, the option to load graffiti dynamically from a file at runtime. We incorporated the recent REST API updates to the debug state endpoint. So we now return the requested state as JSON or SSC, depending on the accept header. We reworked our validator client to optionally use the dependent root fields, which were added just before mainnet, to detect when duties need to be invalidated. We currently have this toggled off by default, but testing on Piermont is going well. We've reviewed the upcoming protocol upgrade changes and have started some refactoring to prep for it. And we've been doing some general cleanup, bug fixes to get performance tests up and running, some hardening of the P2P layer, and some code quality related refactoring. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead with Nimbus.
Hi, we've released a new release 1.0.6. The most significant new feature is that we now have reproducible builds for ARM devices. The other important fix in this release is that we've improved our subnet walking through logic. We now receive a much more amount of unnecessary attestations, and this leads to reduction in load bandwidth and CPU usage because you're not processing these attestations. We are working now on some quite interesting feature, which is a new form of slashing protection, where the attached validators to the node are inactive for several epochs, which is a configurable parameter. And during this period, you monitor the network for potential activity from the same validator running on a different node. And if you detect such an activity, you would either disable the validator running on that node or quit and present some kind of message on the user, urging him to investigate the situation. We are also finally starting work on the REST API. As you know, so far we had JSON RPC API, so we were not really spec compliant, and we are finally addressing this. And also finally, we are now having a proper mailing list where people can subscribe and get updates about our releases. It's available at subscribe.nimbus.team.
Nice. That, as Superfizz called it, that doppelganger detection, I think is a fantastic feature. So from the command line, the default is some number of epochs in if you don't specify, and then you could drive that number in any direction, even down to 0 if you wanted to override.
Well, we have kind of configurable parameters for advanced users, but so far our thinking is to make this really simple. for end users, and we don't offer many options. Just either you have the protection, you don't have it.
Gotcha.
Our parameter is hidden so far, and we are also deploying this right now in production in a special mode where it produces only a warning. So our thinking here is that we want to make sure that there won't be any false positives. So we monitor the system for a couple of weeks to see that these warnings are not triggered on our own fleet, because we know that we don't have Doppelganger validators there.
Right. Nice. And that override command line param can have in caps unsafe. Cool. That's awesome.
But isn't it like, can it not be triggered if you go offline and immediately go back online, like on a restart?
Well, when you restart, the process is expected to repeat yourself. So you can potentially enter this restart loop if you're running with a supervisor, such as systemd. But we've decided that that's reasonable enough because it should be safe.
Right, I'm just saying, when you restart immediately after, it looks like there's a doppelganger, right?
So it will wait for another n epochs, and we will
I see.
again, and so on.
Right. So
even if it does happen, that's kind of harmless, because all that happens is that it shuts down, right? And then the user has to investigate whether there is a doppelganger or not.
I was just talking about the idea that you just check that the warning is never triggered, but I thought it can be triggered even if you're running only one.
Yeah. And then that's a little bit why we don't want to deploy it, in the hard mode immediately. We want to make sure that the user experience is reasonable as well.
Nice, cool. Anything
so
else?
If anybody's interested, there is a PR up with this feature. We can link to it later, where there's a little bit of documentation and obviously then the code details, which are actually very, very easy to read.
Right. Okay, cool. Moving on. Appreciate it. Lighthouse.
Hello. So we've been coordinating as a team to determine how we can best apply ourselves to the phase 0 maintenance and also the sharding and merge works. I've written a blog post about this with our intentions, and we should be releasing it next week. Since the last call, we've published a few releases, lots of fixes and improvements there. We've added a new system for monitoring validators that's in a PR now. So this is on the beacon node side. It has a list of validators and it performs additional logging about when your validator has a block included or attestation included. And it has a lot of Prometheus metrics to do like fine-grained tracking of validators, like the delay when you're getting their attestations and blocks and things. So you can supply the beacon node manually a list of validators to track, or you can get it to detect them automatically by subscription calls to the API. That's still in the PR, but we should see it soon. We're adding support for weak subjectivity sync. This turned out to be quite nice since it's making our database more flexible and generic. We've been reviewing the mid-year upgrade PRs and thinking a lot about how we can best support hard forks with minimal code duplication and complexity. And we're also thinking about how we can support the sharding and merge experimental works inside the Lighthouse repo without jeopardizing the stability of the production code. That's about it from us.
Great, thanks, Paul. Lodestar.
Hey, so we've been working on just making the our beacon node more stable and more friendly to use. So we spent some time speeding up our epoch transition and figuring out how to store fewer states to disk. We also refactored our request and response code, which will help us revisit our syncing. So currently we're working on updating the sync so we can like download and process blocks in parallel. It's a lot better to do that. And we're also now shifting some of our team to be looking at future hard forks. So we've been looking at how to update our database to more easily support hard forks and different types of data. And we are planning our next release for Monday with all of the things that we've done so far.
Great. Thanks, Cayman. And Prysm.
Hey guys, Happy New Year. And so in the last couple of weeks, we have made our slashing protection on the validated client side more performant. It's working better with validated client that holds over more than hundreds of keys. This is on track for version 1.1 release next Monday. And we also have a bunch of bug fixes that has gone into the release. And then on the Eth2 API implementation side, we are almost done with the networking stack. In parallel, we are also experimenting like client sync committees, and then we're forming a accounting with the participation-based changes. And then we're also revamping our test utilities for better test setups. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernst. Okay, I believe that is everyone. So I think we've talked about this across different channels. The current intention would be to do a minor upgrade to the beacon chain in mid-year, early summer would be the target, which would include a couple of nice-to-have features and some cleanups in the way state and things are managed to help with just the maintenance of the beacon chain and maybe some edge cases, for example, processing empty epochs. This currently is in the form of some PR proposals and stuff in what's called the light client spec folder that would be renamed to be the name of whatever this upgrade ends up being called. And generally, I think we want input, especially on some of the state reform stuff from engineering teams, because this ultimately should make things cleaner, but also might, depending on the path taken, represent technical debt. So we kind of want to find the right balance here. So please, there are a couple of PRs up for review, accounting reform and global penalty quotient. These are probably the two more invasive things with respect to state and management and validators, but would love for you to take a look. The other big one there is, which is already in dev under that light client folder, is adding this notion of a sync committee, which is a very similar to a beacon committee, but larger and longer standing, that proposers can include the signature of, which they just kind of sign over the latest block. And what that does is provide light client support kind of as a first-class citizen. In addition to some of the beacon chain changes to support that feature, there is a sync protocol file which demonstrates how you can use this to construct a light client sync protocol and a light client. That's reuses a lot of the components that we already have, the notion of committee, subnets, aggregate signatures, that kind of stuff, and is a big win. So I think it's a nice feature to get in. In addition to that, some things that we might want to discuss are maybe a new message type for reactivation or other things like that, which I think we can discuss in the coming weeks if there are any additional good features to get in there. Beyond that, there are a couple of like network iterations, network fixes that are coming out, which I believe should be released prior to such a fork, and a couple of security fixes to the fork choice, which are under some internal review right now, and I will share those with you once we have concrete proposals, which should be in the next week or so. That too can be released prior to this kind of mid-year upgrade, and probably should be. On all of that, I'm happy, open up for discussion here, and also take the discussion to the repo. I think we need to figure out how to kind of package all of this for discussion and review, other than just hammering out these PRs in the spec repo. Obviously, that can be a bit opaque. So in the next week or so, I'd like to get this just written down, kind of bulleted at least in some form, so we can talk about it in aggregate better. Any questions or discussion on that? This also serves as something of a warm-up, gets our hands dirty in being able to upgrade the beacon chain in a production context. It's going to have to, we'll have to do that on testnets and then do that on mainnet before a couple of the more ambitious and larger upgrades, which would be the merge and sharding further down the line.
Right. I guess one thing to add is that ideally we'd want to kind of come to consensus on like what we want to go into hard. Well, I guess what we're calling hard fork 1 kind of fairly quickly, just so that we don't need to lose any time on moving forward on it. So I'm not the list of kind of items that can potentially go in, as I understand it, is like number 1, sync committees, number 2, the accounting reforms, where there's a kind of lighter version, and then there's a somewhat deeper version that replaces effective balances, or it changes the way that effective balances works, and that kind of moves quotient sum out and makes it easier to process empty epochs. So that's 3, and then also fork choice changes. There's 2 tweaks to resolve some of the issues that people have come up with over the and published some papers about over the last few months. But I guess this will be written up more. Well, these things are already in the issues, and there's already some documents about specific things. But we'll come up with. I'll be help kind of package that together into a more unified list, and it would be, I guess, nice to make a lot of progress on kind of at least some decision making over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, agreed. I think we set ourselves up for moving quickly if we can kind of agree on this in the next 2 weeks, I guess, by the end of January. And so
next call.
Yeah. I'll, if I haven't heard from you from your team on especially those accounting reforms, I will knock on your door pretty soon.
I had a question about that. I mean, part of the reason of doing the accounting reform is because we feel that some of the processing on the epoch transition is a little bit heavy. But I was curious, have you looked at how much of that processing is really in the spec, like in the spec function, and how much of it is due to finality occurring and therefore clients needing to prune trees, save databases, and things like this across the board? I mean, I know from Nimbus, like the difference between processing a block and processing an epoch isn't that significant if we only consider the part in the state transition.
I remember benchmarks from like months, at least it could just be a long time ago, but that said that at the maximum possible validator count, it takes something like 1 slot to fully process the epoch processing function. And So like even if it's not the worst thing, it still seems like something where if I guess if we can alleviate it, we should possibly.
Right. Part of it is
I'm not saying
also.
we shouldn't. I'm just curious if you have any numbers on what's actually going on at the epoch transition, like how much benefit we can expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that of course requires like the latest optimized versions of clients which have implemented pretty much the same accounting already in caches.
Yeah. I mean, any numbers from clients on that would be great. Additionally, it also there's two other wins. One is throughout the epoch, the state actually makes it is much more aware informationally about what's going to happen, which I think could help serve users in more sophisticated APIs. And it actually makes spec writing and spec reasoning simpler. For example, there is an issue currently where the intended proposed reward is just, quite frankly, incorrect. And that was probably, it was an oversight, but it's also because there wasn't like a very clean way to reason about the rewards with respect to kind of how things were configured. And one of the things there is the way rewards are handled and base reward is handled in the accounting reform makes it very clear as we extend and modify rewards in subsequent phases when there's additional validator duties that rewards and issuance are kind of like, you can reason about the relationship between rewards and things to each other much more cleaner. But yeah, I don't have a great intuition on the ratio of state transition to general cleaning today.
And the other thing worth kind of restating is that the deeper reform, the quotient reform, is like particularly attractive because it greatly increases the efficiency of processing empty or nearly empty chains.
Right, which today, depending on how you handle those types of things, can be a pretty big DOS vector.
All right, great, thanks.
I guess another thing to note is that the validator set size is probably going to grow, so optimizations here are valuable. But you're right, a lot of the optimizations, a lot of what this reform does is takes some of the way things are cached and optimized on epoch transitions today and actually just kind of chucks it into state as canonical.
Yeah, from my looking at it, I would be surprised if the accounting reform one saved us much time in the actual epoch processing, but I think it's got potential to save us time in tree hashing and some other kind of edge cases. On the PR, I've added a little list of things that I think it might improve.
Right.
Well, I can just briefly mention that I know from experience in Nimbus that our slowest processing is definitely persisting the state on finalization and on epoch transitions, really. Like that just so massively outweighs everything else that that's what we're focusing on right now with more clever ways of storing the state so that we don't duplicate as much information every time. But that's going to be highly client dependent, I suspect.
All right.
Yeah, the nice thing about the accounting reform one is that it makes it a little bit easier I think it'll make it easier to optimize the database because you're storing this kind of list of bits that it's quite easy to reason about versus a list of weird attestations that are quite, it's really hard to compress them. So I think it'll be handy in the long run.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Okay, so let's refine this conversation in the coming 2 weeks and plan on being able to make a decision on what's in here at the end of January. Again, any input, especially on this global penalty quotient, which is a little bit deeper surgery, maybe for some big gains, would be great. Okay, moving on. I wrote in the agenda Q1 R&D, and this is really what's happening the next couple of months, next few months, to better solidify the path for the 2 larger upgrades that we'd like to do in the coming couple of years. One of which is the merge, the unification of ETH1 and ETH2, and the other is scalability through sharded data availability, both of which have been under very active R&D over the past like half year, and something of specs exists in some capacity on both. Specs on the sharding R&D are up in PRs right now, and merge work has largely been talked about more on ETH research today, even though there are kind of some general articles that Mikhail wrote recently that at least show directionally what's going on there. And both are in different ranges of R&D. There's some prototypes, and even Mikhail has some like local testnets running on the merge stuff. I think in terms of client resourcing, there's stuff to dig into here which can help the R&D effort and help spec effort and help refine these. And then I think the goal would be to, at the end of Q1, have a pretty good handle on both, have something looking like pretty good specs on both, and being able to, at that point, make a decision on what to drive on more concretely in production engineering. Obviously, at that point, I think we'll be working towards this first mid-year upgrade. But after that mid-year upgrade, we want to be able to put the pedal to the metal on one of these 2 major upgrades. So point being is there's some R&D work to do there. So in terms of resourcing on your team, part of it, I think, probably continues to work on phase 0 beacon chain optimizations, and we're looking towards this upgrade. And then part of the team should probably spend some time on education and digging into the R&D to flesh out some of this other stuff. To that end, we do want to do an educational kind of information exchange session at the end of January, maybe the beginning of February, to kind of help bring teams up to speed on this. A few hour workshop presentations and Q&A. Xiaowei's reached out to most of the team, I think the teams here, to help schedule something there. And I think just in general, dig into what the resources are so far, and start thinking about it, providing feedback, and thinking about what your team can do to engage with it, to help refine both of those. It's a bit long-winded. Essentially, we have merge work, we have sharding work. Both are in like heavy R&D and kind of in the early spec phases and testing, and we're working actively to refine them and can use help and at the same time bring you up to speed. I know everyone's been pretty heads down on shipping the beacon chain, and there's some fun stuff to learn about and start engaging with. Questions, thoughts, comments on any of that?
I can add to the merge topic. We plan to have some testnet launch in Q1. Some like more of what we have so far, like not local, but some widely used testnets also. Yeah, and probably it makes sense to start work on the specs. However, there are some open questions, mostly on the ETH1 side, like the block hash stuff.
Right, some of the opcodes.
What's the best place to follow the merge work, Mikhail?
I can share. I have like a document. Let me just drop it here. Yeah. Actually, what we have so far is the ETH research post and this HackMD dropped in chat with like the communication protocol. Actually, you can take this document and see what's required on the ETH2 side to communicate with the ETH1 engine.
Right. So we've, I think, up to this point, been relatively quietly working in, a working group and driving on this, and I think it's definitely time to compile what we have worked on into digestible information, and also kind of opening up this working group so we're not just working in a silo and welcoming more in. So in the coming few weeks, I think that'll be the primary goal of the working group, is just to get all this information out there and begin engaging more publicly. There is a merge channel on the Discord. It's probably a good place to ask questions and start digging deeper. And Mikhail and others will work on making sure that everything's well documented, so we can move from there.
Thank you.
Something of note is some fun cryptography related to the sharding and data availability. These are Kate commitments. If you have a crypto wizard on your team that wants to dig into something new before we do one of these workshops and more information exchange, digging into Kate commitments, it would be good. This is some stuff that's going to need to be written, kind of extension of some libraries, and so yeah, that's definitely something to highlight. Some work to do there. I think Proto has some Go reference implementations that he's working on there that he can share.
About the crypto, yeah, so there are two repositories, one about the data availability prototype and one about the Kate commitments, and a whole lot of peripheral functions that help extend data and recover data from samples. So if you want to look at that, then I'll share the link in the chat.
Great. So we're going to work on getting a date together for a 3-4 hour session where we can go over a lot of this material and share things. And until then, dig into what's there and ask all the questions, so we can help get everyone up to speed and working on this stuff. Anything else here? Just kind of wanted to lay it out. I'm working on a big blog post. I think Paul also in his blog post talks about some of the different R&D efforts that are coming. So hopefully that'll help orient as well. Okay. Any research updates people would like to share today? I guess broadly, merge and sharding work is ongoing. Anything other than that?
And I guess one note here, and it's more of a roadmap strategic thing, is that basically there's two types of features that where we have planned for the future. One is like functionality, things like the merge and sharding. And the other thing is security features. And we have, 4 or 5 different security features. We have things like data availability sampling, like proof of custody, like secret leader election, VDFs, and whatnot. And I guess one of the realizations is that the security of the beacon chain is probably good enough, in the short and medium term. It's not World War III grade. We can make it better with all these, fancy cryptographic security features, but maybe we should be focusing on the functionality. And I guess from a research standpoint, I think we want to try and keep making progress internally at DEF in terms of speccing and prototyping, but maybe limit the expectation that implementers have to understand all this stuff and be on top of things and implement it in the short term. So I'm hopeful that kind of this separation of concerns between security and functionality will allow us to really go full steam on functionality when it comes to implementation, as opposed to having to worry about the more fancy cryptographic stuff, which can come after we've implemented the functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just from the way that we will think about the ordering of specs and how things are released, regardless of when security features are added to mainnet, if they were shipped with the functionality features at the same time or later, you'll see us prioritizing shipping in terms of specs the base functionality so that you can kind of engage with that, and then security features are extensions of that. So it's, I think, a very reasonable way to think about these things and prioritize work. Okay, anything else here? Great. Networking. Age put up an issue. There is, in the way that we do aggregate attestations, there's this optimization in the validations so that you ignore an aggregate attestation if it has the same exact aggregate, if it's essentially the same attestation but different aggregator. This was a nice to have optimization that ultimately actually makes more work on the network today, because all the message ID is actually related to the outer message and not that inner attestation, and so you end up, everyone has different I haves for these what look like the same aggregate message, and you halt the gossip on the repeats, but you end up wasting a bunch of energy on I want and I have to recover. So take a look at Age's issue. It explains it. Ultimately, the optimization is a nice to have, and it probably makes sense to remove that that line unless there is a clean way to keep that optimization in, which, based on a little bit of back and forth between me and Age, I don't know if there is. At least while I have still works the same way it does, and message ID, I think you could do it if you message ID hooked more into the application layer, but then all of a sudden you're mixing layers in a weird way, and you can't very quickly and efficiently calculate message IDs. So take a look at that issue. If we don't have any brilliant thoughts on how to keep that nice to have optimization in there, next week we'll probably put up a PR and remove that line. In addition to that, this blocks sync under weak subjectivity. Yes, Jasik, please.
Can I just say something about the previous one? How about we just drop I have and I want? That's an excellent optimization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valuable conversation to have, is especially in some of these transient attestation channels, it might not be helping us that much. That said, I think if we reduce the number of message IDs that we include in I have, I want, and rely on each node kind of randomly sending some of them, that we greatly reduce the overhead of there and still get a lot of the benefit. But I would love to quantify that benefit on mainnet, because I'm not as skeptical as you, but that benefit might be marginal, and we might just be wasting bandwidth and having additional complexity. So,
well, I mean, there's what, say 50K validators, 1,000 validators per slot, whatever.
right.
1,000 messages, 1,000 message IDs. We select 5 of them. What benefit is there really? If we select 1,000 of them, that's a lot of traffic.
Right. If you select 5 of them and everyone selects 5 of them, and you have 100 peers, there's 500 of them, but coming from all different directions. Or I guess that's not the right assumption, because people are on different subnets. But there is potentially a play at getting some value out of it with some randomness. But look, I hear you. If somebody wants to quantify what I want and I have is doing for us today on mainnet, that would help us make a decision here. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, both on kind of a theoretical standpoint and also if we've observed anything on mainnet that will help inform us? I suppose one of the benefits is in more of the tail risk and attack scenarios, we're covering from the event of censorship attacks and different things like that. So the unintended consequences might not be in the happy case, they might be in the attack scenario case. The unintended consequences of removing it. I'd love to have this conversation, because you're right, there might be unnecessary bandwidth usage here. And maybe removing it disabling it on certain subnets could make sense, if not all.
Yeah, let's take it to the issue. It deserves thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I think there might be one other standing minor network issue. Oh. Well. I don't know if after our last call somebody opened up an issue about error codes and error handling, but that's an ongoing debate. Those couple of minor network adjustments, I would expect in a minor release rather than waiting for like a mid-year upgrade. So keep your eye on that and provide any input on the spec repo if you have it. Any other networking items? Okay, general spec discussion. Any questions, thoughts on anything in there that we want to talk about today? Okay, and open discussion, closing remarks. Anything on anyone's mind?
Testnets. We said we would review Piermont towards the end of January. Are we still happy with Piermont, or should we be doing something different?
Yeah, I guess just a couple of things. One would be testnets serve a couple of purposes for us. One, staging our upgrades and also providing like staging engineering upgrades, and also providing a quality of service to the community to be able to test things. I think that it currently is still serving our purposes, although the more that the community uses it to test and then maybe doesn't exit validators, we could see a degradation in quality of service there. I'm a little bit of the mind, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. but maybe have a plan for when we want to moonlight it and replace it with something more sustainable. I haven't put a lot of thought into this. I haven't put any work into it. It's working, but that's about all I can say. Does anybody have any thoughts on this one?
I'm not hearing anything particularly negative about Piermont. I mean, it does occasionally stumble, but this is fine. It seems to be serving those needs, just trying to get a sense of clarity for planning. For people like Infura want to know where they stand if they adopt Piermont, whether they're going to have to adopt something else straight away, and stuff like that.
Right. One way to potentially keep Piermont in check is as a function of community that joins. We join in a similar ratio with validators we control to kind of keep something like 75 to 80% in our control. I don't think we've added any validators in a long time. We could consider doing so. That would also bump the load up a little bit on the network, which would be good for testing. I don't know. Is anyone unwilling to say Piermont, at least for the next couple of quarters, maybe into this mid-year upgrade? The main problem is that a Gorley whale troll could mess up Piermont overnight without us being able to control that. But maybe that's not too much of a concern.
One minor point is that any large players like exchanges or stuff who want to do testing are not going to be able to use Piermont today in all likelihood, just because if they want to test setups similar to what they will eventually do on mainnet. But my inclination there is just kind of keep them waiting, because they may not necessarily, it doesn't seem like super high priority. So when things get sorted, they get sorted.
Right, and if you need to test more than a couple hundred validators, maybe you should run your own testnet. Okay. Maybe we investigate us doing auto deposits as a function of community deposits to keep the ratio good. Is anything wrong with that idea?
Why is it that people can't test with Piermont?
Oh, they can, but if you want to test 10,000 validators, well, it might be hard to get Gorley ETH, and all of a sudden you might disrupt the network, which some of these exchanges we know do want to run such tests. And a faucet and a Gorley whale, or at least a responsible Gorley whale, probably wouldn't give them that much ETH.
Yeah, I think it's
fair enough.
What was that, Lakshman?
I was just saying, I think the concern is more just disrupting finality of Piermont.
Yeah, absolutely. But if they show up with 10,000 validators and they're a good citizen, there's no issue there. But there's also nothing at stake for them to remain a good citizen.
I think if exchanges and these big players, if they're actually expecting to have a really decent chunk of validators, then I think perhaps we should be open to spinning one up for them, just to protect our own interests as clients by ensuring this good few thousand validators run well. So I don't know if there's any big players out there listening, then they can approach me at least. And we can just spin you up a testnet. We used to do it all the time. It's quite easy. So, we can also just get people to spin up their own testnets.
Yeah, fair.
Perhaps I need to make it more accessible.
Okay, long live Piermont. consider us padding the deposits that client teams control as a function of new entries so that quality doesn't degrade. Okay. Anything else before we close the meeting?
Not for me.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Please have someone on your team take a look at the open PRs that we'd like engineering feedback on. Please begin to dig into sharding and merge resources to bring yourself up to speed. And we will talk to all in 2 weeks and then do some sort of educational information exchange workshop shortly after. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.